Good morning, everybody. Today we will look at why most e-com brands completely overcomplicate Google Ads and how to fix it properly. So without further ado, let's dive straight into it. So first things first, the complexity trap. Why do most e-com brands even overcomplicate Google Ads? And it's quite natural. It's human nature. Like, we want to make a lot of changes because we think a lot of effort, a lot of work in the ad account, a lot of changes means higher output. But that's not necessarily true, especially not with how the campaigns work with machine learning and algorithm. More changes, more effort from your side, whatever you do doesn't mean more output, right? So that's the most important thing first. And like I said, it's human nature. We want to do that, especially if things don't go the right way. If you have one day that's very bad, and then maybe another, you start to panic, right? You make a lot of budget changes. You start to over-segment the campaigns, split them up too much, change too much, try to tweak little things here and there, right? And you do that all the time with like different settings in the ad account, whatever it is, campaigns, over-segmentation, bid and budget changes, testing a lot of creatives here and there, splitting it up again for like different angles, right? Like just overcomplicating it too much. And again, here we have it. Complexity feels productive, but it destroys Google's ability to learn, especially in new ad accounts, right? So avoid that. The key takeaway is when data is still thin, if you don't have a lot of data yet, keep things simple in the beginning. Especially if there's not a lot of traffic coming to your site yet, maybe from other channels, like it takes some time in the beginning. You want to keep it simple, well structured, to gather a lot of data, a lot of conversions first, and then performance will optimize. We checked it out a little bit already, but why does this complexity happen, right? So like I said, it's human nature, but there are a lot of common traps. So what we often notice is like in-house teams or teams from client side, from your side, feel sometimes the pressure to do more, especially, and that happens sometimes, especially if they're bored, they still have some capacity. So they're like, all right, we have to do something, right? Have to feel busy. And then sometimes, that makes sense. If you have the capacity, please use it effectively. But sometimes, like you start to use it in the wrong way, where you start to overcomplicate things, overthink things, and you like just focus your efforts on the wrong things. So we do see that sometimes where like your in-house CMO or sometimes like has too much time and they try to like tweak things where it shouldn't be tweaked, right? Can be really, really fatal. And I saw that a lot, especially like with bigger brands sometimes and even bigger agencies. Which leads me to the second point. Agencies even sometimes implement structures. And it's like, it hurts me a lot when I see that as an agency as well. But sometimes we do see structures where the agency knows, hey, this is not optimal for best results, but they like to implement that because it makes them look more busy, where they have this like crazy structure. And dude, I see that sometimes like when clients come on a call with me and they complain about agencies when they keep it too simple. And that can be a mistake too. But that's why agencies do that sometimes, where they completely overcomplicate things because they know the client loves that, right? So agencies do that sometimes just to look more prestige, look more busy, have this like super crazy advanced structure, right? But in the end, performance sucks because of that. So common pitfall as well. Then the next one, so I will spend a bit more time on that because they are like super important. Control, right? Wherever it is, founder, CMO again, or even agencies, sometimes they want more control, and then they implement structures where they have this perceived control over ROAS, profit margin, which categories get the spend, whatever. And they implement a structure that just like, again, doesn't benefit the performance, where you see significantly less volume or sometimes even a shittier ROAS with that. And we had that before. We had that before when clients came to us from other agencies and we saw like crazy structures. And honestly, like not trying to bash you, like those structures, they like in theory, it was great, like feed was clean, the campaign structure made sense. Everything was like perfect per se, right? But it was just too much for an account of that size. And sometimes like the first thing that we did is basically just consolidating it and make the structure way, way leaner, whatever made the most sense in that specific case, right, for the specific client. And dude, even within a very short period of time, we saw like great performance uplift, right? took a while, like a couple of days relearning phase, but then after some time already like 10-15% improvement just by consolidating, doing nothing else, just doing that better, easier structure. All right, and then some of the other things we previously touched base on, where it's like human nature, you want to see a lot of movement, a lot of work, a lot of effort, right? That's very common. Or sometimes even a messy foundation where you already start with a bullshit setup, bullshit feed, and the way it's structured, and you kind of like stuck in that structure, and then you're also like scared of going away from it, especially if it's borderline working and hey, it could be better, but it's already kind of working, so you're like kind of stuck with that, also very dangerous. But the most important thing, and that's what I mentioned in the beginning as well, you think like a human and what works best based on your logic. But that's not how the campaigns work, because the campaigns are not human, right? They are based on machine learning processes, on algorithms, and you need to understand the way it works with the data and how much you really need for it in order for campaigns to work properly, So everything that makes sense from your side sometimes is not necessarily great for the algorithm, and you have to understand that part as well, right? Ideally, you are able to combine both aspects, like the human side of things, to first of all understand your customer, but also like your business goals. But you also have to understand the algorithm and how it works in order to scale properly. So the point made is basically most complexity is, emotional, human flaw, not necessary, and definitely not strategic. And honestly, in 90% of the cases, doesn't benefit you at all. So what do the best brands do instead, and what do we do at the agency, for example? Couple of rules here, super important. First things first, consolidation, especially with a new account, especially with smaller accounts. And what we even have with our biggest accounts, I think that's like a key statement. One primary shopping or PMX campaign, usually PMX, feed only most of the time for us, holds 80%, 70 to 80% of the volume every single time in every account. Every single time. Unless you have like different markets in the same account, then it's like different, of course. But let's say one market, right? 80% of the volume coming from one PMX campaign, especially when shopping is the main channel, then that's 100% the case all of the time. And then the rest of we have different shopping campaigns, especially for bigger accounts. Those are campaigns then that are just like strategic segmentation, right? So we don't do that if it doesn't benefit us. But sometimes it makes sense to boost, for example, we split up campaigns to isolate low performers in a separate campaign, right? Then we have like separate booster campaigns to push up zombie products that didn't get a lot of spend yet, to make sure they get enough spend, especially with bigger catalogs, bigger feeds, super important. Sometimes, to even like boost certain categories where we know they have a lot of potential but didn't really pick up yet. So a lot of like different smaller campaigns, but they are usually just support campaigns, booster campaigns, or any other kind of strategic campaign that just makes sense in that case. There are a lot of cases where it might make sense, but again, like this is just a very small part. 70-80% of the volume usually comes from one PMX when it comes to shopping. Then we of course like have other campaigns later down the line, depending on the account, search, demand gen, YouTube, whatever makes the most sense. Sometimes we have big budgets on that as well. But even there, same principle, right? You also start very, very simple. You have one big campaign, you consolidate, you have a simple structure, find something that works, and then you can push that properly. So data density is the actual scaling cheat code. And that's true because this is how the campaigns work. And especially, let me repeat that one more time, especially for smaller accounts and accounts with little data. Because we often see it when clients who don't even have a lot of revenue yet come to us and think they can have this like crazy structure in place, right? And then skyrocket their sales on day one. Completely stupid and unrealistic. So that you have to understand that, like, that's super important. All right. And at the foundation of all of that is to have clear signals, a clear signal foundation architecture, however you want to call it, right? That starts with the feed, that starts with the campaign, that makes also sure like everything in the backend is set up properly. That even starts with the backend, right? Making sure, all right, we have a price that makes sense and that is scalable on Google. The quality of the images, the quality of your data input in the backend, like product titles, product description, meta fields, like everything, right? You want to have clear signals, and then you can also like optimize later on nicely for ROAS, BORs, etc. So bottom line is top brands treat their feed management, especially more like a CRM. So what that means basically is it's not just something you upload once and it's done. It takes and requires constant effort, constant optimization. I like to call it an ongoing optimization flywheel, right? You get an input, you see what works, you see what doesn't work, you optimize, you continue, you get another input, you see what works, what doesn't work, and you constantly continue to do that until it gets better and better and better, right? Because you get an input on what works, you get an input on what doesn't work, you make optimizations based on that, and then you make little tweaks, and then you optimize, and then it goes slowly and slowly in the right direction, right? So that's super important. All right, rules, not reactions. So like I just said, we tweak, but not just based on emotional reactions like, hey, ROAS is down, or like whatever it is, something like that, but based on data input, we optimize, right? So we don't just tweak and play around and try to like do some things. We are more strategic, more linear, focused on bigger time frames, and we optimize, we don't tweak. We follow systems, certain rules basically, right? Rules, not reactions. That's the bottom line of it. Rules, systems. So we have clear budget tiers or scaling systems, like when do we scale, how do we scale, clearly defined rules, right? Which we will not share here in that video. That would be a bit too much to go all into that. But then also like clear performance buckets and when we have to segment, when we split up campaigns and why. So that's not just on accident, but we know when, right? Which is basically the next point here, but let's go step by step. So everything is based on rule and systems, right? It's not reactive, not emotional. You operate calmly. That's the bottom line of it. And like I already said, segmentation only when the data justifies it. Not when you feel like it, not when you think, hey, that might make sense, right? Because like this and that. No, like I don't give a shit what anybody thinks. I don't give a shit what I think, If when I sit down and I'm like, I have an opinion, I might think, yeah, that might make sense. And my opinion is usually based on a lot of experience. But even then, if it's a big change, I sleep over it, and the next day I check the data again. So does this actually make sense, and why, and what's the expected output with it, If not, segmentation is not needed. If it can help me, if it benefits me, if it helps the further growth, then we segment. But only once we have a lot of data, right? So you need at least 50 to 100 conversions, which is not a lot of data, but especially in a new ad account, if you don't have a lot of revenue yet, it can take some time to get that. And then you can start to slowly split up. Again, if it makes sense. If not needed, keep that, scale that as long as it works well for you. Gather even more data if needed, ideally, and then you start to segment slowly, right? Section 4, basically the summary of that video. Simplicity scales, right? Super important. That doesn't mean it's a too simple structure, a poor structure, or poor work in general. If you see a campaign structure that is rather simple, in a lot of cases that makes a lot of sense. And honestly, like I said, in 99% of the cases, the over-segmentation and these weird splits that a lot of agencies or in-house teams do, they don't help the performance. So simplicity actually scales, but you have to know when to be simple, when to keep a simple structure, and when to segment. That's the magic of it, right? But basically, in most cases, you will win by doing less, not more, because you have to respect how these things work. And the benefit of this will be you will have more stable learning, faster momentum in the beginning, less workload, obviously, because you avoid these weird changes, cleaner forecasting, because again, it will be more stable if you have that, and less volatility, more consistency overall. Because the more you split it up, right, the little budget that you have and you push it over 10, 20 campaigns, that will be very inconsistent because every campaign behaves differently, right? But if you consolidate that more, you have bigger budgets in a smaller campaign pool, that will be more consistent. Yeah, you can navigate that better. Also for later on, if you might plan to in-house your Google Ads efforts instead of working with an agency, it will also help you to build on a good, strong, simple foundation, right? So that's also something we work on lately and train and coach in-house teams to actually take over the Google Ads. So that's something we will roll out soon, but also super important for that, right? And in total, just better alignment with everything, right? With your feed, with your campaigns, creatives, your internal strategy, whatever it is, business goals. Like, the more complex it gets with your structure, the more complex and complicated it will be to keep everything aligned and pointing towards the same goal, right? So simplicity isn't basic, it's the discipline you need to scale properly. All right, and last but not least, once you have that simple, great foundation, then you can think about scaling, right? And then it will also be reflected in your results. And that's a whole nother story, how to scale then, which scaling framework to apply to your campaign or to your account, to your business, at which stage. That's a whole nother story. We have different videos on that, so I will just link it there in that video. You can check it out afterwards. The notion of this video will also be in the description down below again. Like, subscribe, be there for the next video, or like if you want to. If not, see you another time. I will catch you. No, just joking. But that's pretty much it for today. Check that out for step 5 once you have the foundation in place on how to scale with shopping and beyond, and then later on also with demand gen and YouTube. That's it for today. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Bye bye.